Imagine being called up one day by a police officer and asked to come into the local police station for an interview regarding a highly concerning crime that had been committed. You agree and you arrive at the station later that day. When you sit down with the detective, he reaches across the table and hands you a horrifying image. It is a photograph of a comatose woman being raped by a strange man. Your stomach drops and you can't help but think how awful you feel for this poor woman being violated in this image. However, he then hands you several more photographs depicting similar scenes, and you suddenly halt in your tracks, realizing that you are the woman in the photographs, lying there inert and being raped by scores of different strangers, and that it was caught on thousands of videos and photographs and other such heinous media. And then, as your world is crashing down around you, they hit you with the most seismic piece of information yet, that your beloved husband of 50 years was behind these photos and videos being taken of you without your knowledge, and that he was in fact the chief architect of your mass rape.
She's lived through unbelievable horrors, yet has no recollection of them. Now in this courthouse in southern France, she will learn, along with her grown-up children, what her husband did to her.
Masked, as usual, the 50 men accused of raping Gisele Pelicot as she lay drugged by her husband have now finished giving evidence. Almost all still deny rape, but explicit video footage of their actions has been shown in court.
They all raped an unconscious woman who was unable to give her consent. Not one of them reported it to the police. It's time for a change to our macho, patriarchal society, one that trivializes rape.
92 rapes, 72 men, 23,000 pieces of media documenting these encounters, all while the victim was drugged and unconscious, all while her own husband orchestrated and filmed each and every encounter. That is the story of Gisele Pelicot, the main victim of a man now known as the Monster of Avignon.
Police counted a total of 92 rapes committed by 72 men, 50 of whom were identified and are now on trial alongside the main defendant.
In the courtroom, facing that husband pictured standing here, Pelicot described the moment her happy marriage collapsed, when a French policeman showed her pictures from her husband's laptop, pictures of strangers raping her.
It was hard to recognize myself. Then the officer showed me a second photo, and a third. I asked him to stop. It was unbearable. I was lifeless in my bed, and a man was raping me. My world fell apart.
I ran across this story on Instagram recently, and my jaw hit the floor. It was positively bone-chilling. Woman raped by 51 men, which we now know to be an underestimate of the actual total, which was more along the lines of 72 men. However, only 51 could be identified. I could not believe what I was reading until I listened closely and realized I had actually heard inklings of this case in the media. Gisele Pelicot is a 71-year-old French woman from a town in the southeast of France who was made famous after it was revealed by a police investigation that her 71-year-old husband, Dominique Pelicot, had been drugging and essaying her regularly for a period of nearly 10 years, from July 2011 to October 2020. But the story gets much, much worse. So let's just get right into the top disturbing facts in this case, because they are simply beyond belief. Gisele's husband had been drugging her with her anti-anxiety tranquilizer medication and forcing himself upon her for nearly 10 years. Why, you ask? Because he's a vile, detestable, irredeemable freak.
In his own last comments, Dominique Pelicot spoke of his fantasy of making a strong woman submit to him.
Dominique would come to admit that the mass rape of his wife while she was unconscious was born from him realizing how drowsy she became whenever she took her prescribed medication, lorazepam, also known as Temesta. This then inspired him to drug her food and drinks without her knowledge in order to make her unconscious so that he could commit sexual acts on her that she would have otherwise objected to, such as anal sex. The depravity only spiraled from there once he realized he could exert total control over his wife and her body, and that she would be none the wiser. Dominique began getting more and more Temesta from his own doctor, and at one point was prescribed about 450 pills in 1 year. God only knows why they prescribed this to him. With it, he continued his horrific acts, sometimes taking Viagra to help himself out, and even began recording these acts and uploading them to a secret chat room he was involved in to allow an audience of strangers to watch. Other men were then invited by Dominique to participate in violating Gisele, 72 that we know of to be exact. They were all given access to her by her sick, demented husband. This mass rape was perpetrated against a single woman over the course of 10 years. Throughout that time, the men were not allowed to wear fragrances or smell like cigarettes just in case it alerted Gisele to their presence. They were also very weirdly not allowed to wear condoms, despite one of them having HIV, and this resulted in Gisele contacting at least 4 different STIs or STDs, thankfully none of which were HIV. And I suppose the weirdest part of all of this is that the men weren't even required to pay to sleep with Gisele. They were allowed to rape her for free, which continues to bring into question what the was the motive behind her husband treating her this way. Apart from being a twisted piece of shit, was there some other incentive for him apart from some incomprehensible mass fetish? The drugging and mass assault would naturally come to take a toll on Gisele's poor health, and she experienced symptoms like weight loss and memory loss and incoherence at times that she began to attribute to Alzheimer's disease or a freaking brain tumor. This poor woman. And of course, when she visited countless doctors about her symptoms, her husband tagged along and gaslit her out of believing anything serious was going on with her health. The doctors were also totally oblivious and couldn't tell she was being drugged and traumatized.
And a case that raises questions about individual guilt and collective responsibility. How many in the picturesque Provence village of Mazan knew? As her mental and physical health deteriorated over a period of years, it was only when gendarmes investigating a cold case came across lewd photos shared over the internet that she discovered the horror. Why did no one come forward?
The rapes were recorded. Thousands of recordings exist of this woman being violated by scores of strange men. I cannot fathom that sentence. I can't even fathom the idea of anyone having sex with scores of people, let alone it being every single time. This is horror beyond words. It is inhuman animal depravity. It's utterly unconscionable. And to his utter terror, I'm sure, Stéphane Babonu, Gisele's attorney, had to sit through thousands of these recordings and watched her be violated again and again, and then had to inform her of the specifics of what was done to her in order to make their case, because she had no clue. I'm genuinely sick to my stomach. On a USB stick connected to Dominique Pelicot's computer, investigators found a folder simply labeled Abuses, containing more than 20,000 images and videos of his unconscious wife being raped. The label on the folder alone proves that these were rapes and that the men were aware that they were abusing this woman. So the idea that any of them didn't know this was non-consensual is debunked by the very label on the video file. The videos have been filed with explicit titles and conveniently with the names of the men involved. Investigators were able to distinguish 92 separate incidents of committed on Gisele by 72 different men from the period of July 2011 to October 2020. And imagine how much we aren't even seeing, because her husband likely had more of this sick material on older devices that were not discovered. It took the police 2 whole years to identify and locate 50 of the 72 perpetrators. Also, it's important to note, he was caught because he was violating other women, which we'll get into later. It took the police 2 whole years to identify and locate 50 of the 72 perpetrators. However, unfortunately, the rest remain unidentified and walking free and have gotten away with their crimes against humanity and are probably even doing this or similar things to other people. The scariest part is that men of all ages participated. The perps were found to be from 21 to 74 years old at the time, and among them were retirees, firefighters, nurses, journalists, and more. Very scary stuff. That means men who appear totally normal, public-facing, are committing unspeakably depraved acts behind closed doors, while their family, friends, and neighbors remain none the wiser.
They're between 20 and 70 years old. They have all sorts of jobs. Their fathers, they're integrated in society. That's who rapists are. Not a madman, a monster, or a dropout. They're just ordinary men.
These crimes and many others, including murder, violent homophobic attacks, and child sexual abuse, were facilitated on an illicit chat forum called Coco. The site would eventually be shut down during the course of the investigation, and the founder and other execs were arrested. The investigation of Dominique's tech devices, such as mobile phones, a computer, and an external hard drive, showed he had been a part of a chat room called A Son and Sue, translated to without her knowledge, which is just chilling. And in this chat room, the members discussed performing sexual acts on women without their consent, without their knowledge, often administering drugs to sedate them. The website had actually been connected to thousands of other French criminal cases from 2021 to 2024 and eventually was shut down in June of 2024. However, it gives me chills to know they, without doubt, have simply moved on to some other dark, depraved corner of the web to do the same thing. Men like these cannot be deterred. They are driven by something ghastly to behave this way in the first place. And when it amounts to them being determined to violate all social norms and the bodily autonomy of the women in their lives, there is simply no hope for humanity at that point. How do you stop people this depraved and hedonistic and who are willing to sink to such deplorable levels to victimize others? The truth is, you can't. Case in point, Dominique Pelicot, who again invited other men to his wife. So he's so depraved that it's not enough for him to get off on drugging and raping her. He is also fetishizing her being raped by strangers. I cannot deal with this information. There were also reportedly Skype messages found in which he bragged about the crimes he was committing against his wife with the help of strangers. So he was proud of what he was doing and bore no shame whatsoever. Surrounding this case is a highly disturbing question of consent. Many of the men involved, of course, deny their guilt and deny that the act that they committed was rape. And they do this by accusing Gisele of secretly being awake and participating in a sex game with her husband. But some even go so far as to suggest that they thought the act was okay because her husband had provided consent, and in their minds, this was enough. How do you even contend with men who would take a husband's consent as justification for sleeping with an unconscious woman? That is unfathomably perverse and evil, and a troubling indicator of how little men seem to have evolved from like the Stone Age. Let's be clear, Gisele was not aware that any of this was occurring and did not consent to any of it. She had also not been involved with any threesomes or spouse swapping with her husband. It took several photos to be presented to her by the investigators before she even recognized herself as the woman in the photos, which is mind-numbingly scary. She would then testify about this moment saying, "I asked him," the man showing her the photos, "to stop. It was unbearable. I was inert in my bed and a man was raping me. My world fell apart." Just try to imagine her pain, humiliation, fear, and bodily trauma for a second. I cannot think of anything more frightening or world-ending than finding out something like this had happened to you. That your own, quote, perfect, caring, and attentive husband of 50 years had turned you into a sex slave for fun. Disturbing details Gisele's lawyers discovered upon watching thousands of tapes included the degradation she was subjected to by her abusers. This included lingerie, degrading words, paper placed over her face, her being filmed on the night of her birthday, on New Year's Eve, on Valentine's Day, in her daughter's bed, on her dining room table, in her car at a motorway service station, and even a video of her choking on some man's penis with her husband telling him to be gentle and to let her breathe. The sheer disloyalty towards her and the fact that he broke his covenant of marriage for 10 years to gratify total strangers on the internet astounds me. Wait, it gets worse. Yes, if you can believe it, there's more horror. Dominique was also victimizing other women in his family. Images were found on his computer of his daughters-in-law in the shower, which had been taken with a hidden camera, and of his partially nude daughter, Caroline Darien, unconscious on a bed as if she had been drugged. This is proof he had already or intended to do the same with her. According to The Guardian, he has vehemently denied abusing his daughter, but is also charged with violating Darien's privacy by sharing other images he secretly recorded of her that police found in a file named Around My Daughter, Naked. My God, these are the sort of men who don't deserve due process. They should be taken out back, and I suppose I shouldn't finish that sentence, but I sincerely believe this is the way they should be handled. Or men who should not only be castrated, but also subjected to undergo the same sort of abuse they inflicted on others. I know that can't take place in a civilized society, but it doesn't make them any less deserving of such a fate. The other men wanted to do the same thing to other members of their families. One 30-year-old vineyard worker named Charlie, who was accused of raping Gisele on 6 occasions over 4 years, including on the night of her 66th birthday, said he wanted to drug and essay his own mother. A video showed a conversation in Gisele's bedroom between Charlie and Dominique discussing a plan to drug and rape Charlie's mother in the same way. In the footage, Charlie says he will give an address and date for this to take place. Both men told the court this conversation did indeed take place, but they said they did not rape Charlie's mother. However, similar drugs were discovered in Charlie's mother's system in the course of the investigation, and she insisted that she had never taken that medication before. So, you can derive from that what you will. Dominique is also accused of inciting Jean-Pierre Marchal to drug and rape his own wife, and he was also in turn charged with attempted rape in this case. So, what ultimately stopped the rape? Well, the most bizarre set of circumstances brought these crimes to light and ultimately stopped them. In September 2020, Gisele's husband was arrested for taking pictures of women's skirts at a grocery store, and the police investigation that resulted from this incident uncovered thousands of images and videos of men raping his wife on his computer devices. So it was still going on while they were well into their 60s and was only discovered on a whim because this sick, insatiable fuck couldn't get enough and was caught victimizing other innocent women. Imagine that. It would still be occurring right now had this creep not been caught by police on a totally unrelated matter. That's too diabolical to stomach. Dominique Pelicot was arrested in November 2020 and charged with aggravated rape, drugging, and other sexual offenses. He was also accused of violating the privacy of his wife, daughter, and 2 daughters-in-law by covertly taking and disseminating intimate images of them. Wildly, he admitted his guilt right away, almost like he's proud of it. The trial of Dominique Pelicot and 50 other men who stand accused of rape and face up to 20 years in prison each began on September 2nd, 2024, and is scheduled to conclude in mid-December. A total of 23 of the accused had had previous convictions, including acts of domestic and sexual violence. While some admitted their guilt in these crimes, few actually. Many others maintained their innocence and claimed Gisele had consented and that she was simply pretending to be asleep in the videos. Talk about evil incarnate, my God. And the kicker is, Dominique Pelicot was also charged with the rape and murder of a 23-year-old estate agent named Sophie Narm in 1991, and he was also charged with the attempted rape of a 19-year-old estate agent. Both women had been showing a man around an apartment when they were attacked. His DNA was found on the 19-year-old who had been drugged with ether but managed to fight back and escape. He finally admitted to the attempted rape but continues to deny the actual rape and murder of Sophie.
Rape is rape. Gisele Pelicot emphatic on the stand Wednesday in a trial that sent shockwaves well beyond France's borders. The 72-year-old retiree batting away suggestions that the 50 defendants invited by her ex-husband to enter their bedroom when she was under sedation could have engaged in anything other than non-consensual sex. Pelicot has drawn admiration for her decision to waive her right to protection from the public eye and to sit front and center in the courtroom every day since the September 2nd opening of a trial that's due to last till December in the southern city of Avignon.
All throughout my research of this case, I've seen Gisele be heralded as a brave woman who, in spite of her harrowing experiences, chose to waive anonymity in this trial and chose to allow the trial to take place in open court, basically a publicized trial, to stick it to her many rapists. Because you can imagine her keeping this trial under wrap would have only benefited those men and their families, which they are totally undeserving of. They're so cowardly, they even walk into the courtroom trying to completely conceal their identities. Without doubt, Gisele is unbelievably strong and courageous and deserves every bit of the praise she has received for that bold decision. Carolyn Darien, one of Gisele's 3 children, who was also victimized by her father after a photograph was discovered of her partially nude body on a bed amongst his other sick media, and is therefore suspected to have been essayed by her father as well, would go on to write a book about the case and how it affected her family called "And I Stopped Calling You Dad." That's the English translation of the title. A refusal to help protect one's abusers is one of the most critical aspects of defeating them for good and finally bringing them to justice. And apparently her mother struggled to get to that point, but I'm glad she's there now. I'm so glad these 2 women found the strength to stand up and stick it to this sick monster and his many sick cohorts and expose them to the world.